Well, my name's Ken Findlay, and I was born in Jarrow here in 1936, which in another month or so will take me up to 74 years of age. I went to the local St Peter's Church school and left there in 1952. Upon which I started, well, I thought I was starting as an apprentice draftsman in the Palmer's shipbuilding, or the subsequent successors to the Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company, which was Palmer's Hebburn Company. And I remember turning up on the first day with a pocket full of pencils and in my new charcoal grey trousers and my new jacket, thinking I was going to be drawing transatlantic liners and Queen Marys and Queen Elizabeths and things like that. In actual fact, I found it was much more mundane, and before they would let me near any of the drawing boards in there, I had to spend the first year as the office boy, running around doing all sorts of messages for the more senior draftsmen in the office. And rather than drawing ships, I found my most onerous duties were keeping these men stocked up with various brands of cigarettes, which, as you'll probably remember, in those days, where it was going round, it was like trying to find bars of gold. It was easier to find bars of gold than it was to find packets of Capstan full strength and things like this, But anyway, after doing that for a year or two and running around in the shipyard delivering messages and work lists, as they were called, telling the various trades what they had to do, which I found invaluable. Although I was a lowly office boy, what I was in fact doing was learning or gaining a vast amount of information about all the trades that went on in the shipyard, which I found invaluable in later life.
So which are the different departments that you went to in your apprenticeship?
Do you mean the departments I actually worked in? Well, I started off in the drawing office, but to acquire the skills necessary, they pushed me around into various departments in the yard, and I worked with the shipwrights on docking and undocking ships. I worked in the mould loft, as it was called. This work was done also by shipwrights, but they used to draw full-size sections of the ship on a black floor, like a large blackboard, and it enabled them to make templates of the various plates, full-size templates of the various plates that were needed to go onto ships. I also worked with the blacksmiths in the yard. This I found particularly hard because it was very strenuous work, and I'm convinced that part of my initiation into that department was being given some of the more strenuous things to do. I think they were anxious to show me what they could do compared with what a softie from the drawing office could do, And I worked with all sorts of other trades, including platers, who used to mark and cut the shipbuilding plates and sections. I tried my hand at welding also, and just generally getting as much experience of all the other trades as possible, which would help me in understanding and about these jobs and knowing what to do when I was preparing drawings and in giving them instructions rather than receiving instructions from them.
In all those departments you went to, were there any of them that you sort of thought, oh, I could fancy this one?
No, because I think by that time I had already decided that the trade that I was being apprenticed to was the trade for me. By the time I came to do these things, I was already embarked on a whole series of evening classes, mainly about shipbuilding and naval architecture, and eventually I qualified as a naval architect by obtaining a higher national certificate in naval architecture, which was just about the highest you could go at that time. Other than going to university, you know.
You were saying last time that you found out sort of a bit later on that you'd had a premium apprenticeship and that people paid.
Yes.
So could you just explain a bit about
yes.
those?
When I came along, there was quite a few older guys, and as I got to know them, they explained to me that they told me how very lucky I was that at that time the premium apprenticeships scheme had fizzled out, if that's the word, and that when they started to be taken on in a drawing office, their parents had to pay for them to be trained, and that was they were called premium apprenticeships. But by the time I came along, I don't know, the whole world situation had changed, I suppose, and that didn't appertain at that time. It was a case of you got there on your own ability, sort of thing. As a matter of fact, I was recommended for this sort of training by my school teacher, or my last school teacher, a guy called Ernie Stenton at St. Peter's School, who recognised something in me, probably from the artwork and paintings that I did in the school, you know. And he recommended me to the firm, and on the basis of his recommendation, it took me on to do this sort of thing, and it just went from there. I will say that the apprenticeship of a draftsman wasn't quite of the same duration as that of a plater or a welder or something. Their apprenticeships lasted for 5 years, whereas the apprenticeship for a draftsman basically was for 5 years. But at that time, at the end of the 5 years, you didn't become a draftsman. You were known as an improver, and you had to work another 2 or 3 years before they said you were qualified as a ship's draftsman. Anyway.
So after you started your apprenticeship, and for the first sort of year, you were making cups of tea and fanning cigarettes for people and things. Once you kind of got into it and you were doing more work, what would you be doing each day? What kind of work and what kind of machinery would you be using, or tools?
Well, I wasn't using machinery. It was all using pencils, pens, scale rulers, because all the drawings were done to scale. You know, 1/4 of an inch to a foot, or 1/8 of an inch to a foot, or if you were doing detailed drawings, that'd be 1/2 an inch. And so very, very rarely full scale, but they were basically scale drawings. Yeah.
So did you have to be quite mathematically?
Yes, as time went on, and I obtained the skills in mathematics at evening school, of course. And this is one of the things that I hadn't realised at first, that whereas doing the shipbuilding drawings required shipbuilding knowledge and some artistic skills, the naval architecture part, the part where you would design ships and produce the instructions that went with the ships, just tell them how to load and trim ships, whether the stern or the stem went up or down, to tell them what the final drafts would be. All this sort of stuff was highly mathematical, and you progressively learned that at evening evening classes, or then day classes as time went on. And I progressed through the trade, and I would say towards the end of my career, end of that part of my career in 1970, I was working almost full-time on ship calculations, and by that time I was also entrusted with doing some estimating work, the cost of ship repairs, and estimating the cost of ship repairs and that sort of thing, quantities of materials and whatnot. I would say towards the end of that part of my working life, I was more or less fully mathematical calculations. At that stage, of course, things were changing in the shipbuilding and ship repairing industry on the River Tyne, and I saw the changes coming, and I left the shipyards and went to work for an organisation called Lloyds Register of Shipping, where I became a ship surveyor. I don't know.
So what did happen when the changes started coming? What did happen?
The changes were that ships were getting bigger and bigger, and the facilities on the River Tyne weren't big enough to cope with them. The biggest ships that were ever built on the Tyne were in the Swan Hunter shipyards, and they were called, because of the amount of cargo they could carry, they were called 250,000-ton tankers. And it was a real struggle for Swan Hunters to build these ships, and more particularly to launch them into what, if we're honest, is a relatively narrow river. All these massive vessels are all built out in the Far East now, where they can launch them, and there's sufficient water for them just to go. They don't have to be constrained to stop them from hitting the opposite bank and be damaged, you know. Another change was the fact that as ships became bigger and they became more complex, complex machinery-wise, complex electronically, more navigation equipment, they became more expensive to build, and the control over the finances of the shipyards was not absolutely taken out of the hands of the owners of the shipyards, but taken into the hands of the banks, who had to subsidise who had to pay for the ongoing building of the yards, building of the ships, and well, the banks took more and more control over what went on, and this, of course, wasn't always to the liking of the men who worked in the yards, and there was all sorts of labour problems and threats of yards closing and things like that. And
you just saying before at the with the River Tyne in sort of relatively small space of water, really, and ships bashing into it. Did that happen a lot? Did they have to?
It occasionally happened. Yes. Occasionally happened, and there was damp. There was never any, as far as I remember, there was never any massive damages. But it was just another on cost, you know. They had to, if they were damaged, ships are launched stern first, and the things that do bash the side, as you say, are the rudders and the propellers and things like that, which are all expensive items. But even if you have steelwork to repair, it still means going into dry dock and plates being taken off and plates being put on again, and it's all an extra on cost. And bearing in mind that the yards were trying to be highly competitive against the new competitors in the Far East, Japan and Korea and places like this.
What were the conditions like, say, because you did a bit of time in the dry dock when you were working the shipwrights?
Yes.
What was it like working in the dry dock?
it was a back-breaking experience, I will tell you that, because I was then working with people who were used to doing hard graft, as the saying goes. And as I said, being a softie from the drawing office, I just wasn't capable of working 7 or 8 hours a day, hammering, and because the shipwrights do a lot of work moving large parts of structures with hammers and wedges. You know, the bits, launching a ship, it involves lifting the ship and putting it down again onto sliding ways. And they lift thousands of tons of steel, and it's done basically by inserting wedges in various places and men hammering the ship up and hammering the ship down. And to do this sort of work requires great reserves of stamina, you know. And as I say, as a softie from the drawing office, I really appreciated what these men do, but there was no way I could compete with them in doing this sort of work.
What were the men like? I mean, how was it a very sort of raucous kind of environment?
Yes, yes. I think if you talk to people in this area who worked in the shipyards, they will tell you that every shipyard worker is a working men's club comedian at heart. Humour goes on. Various shades of humour goes on all the time in the yards. Everybody, and I would say without exception, has a nickname. Unfortunately, sometimes it's to do with some peculiarity of their build or something like this, but it's all taken with good humour.
Were you given a nickname?
Well, that's the trouble. You never know, do you? Everybody uses it, but not to your face. You know? I think I told you the case of later on when I was a surveyor in shipyards on the River Wear. I used to go into one shipyard called Austin and Pickersgill, and there was one guy there he was a foreman. So his men would recognise him in the crowd. He had changed the colour of his safety helmet. Instead of his safety helmet being white like most other people's, he had painted his red, post office pillar box red. And forevermore, he was, you now had a chap with white overalls and a red hat, and he was forever known as Puck Match. You know, the safety match. And it was just things like that. They weren't all cruel, you know. Most of them were quite funny. As I say, they were all comedians at heart.
So when you were, because you grew up round here, didn't you?
Yes.
What was Jarrow like as a place to grow up, and what were the sights and sounds and smells around you?
Well, you know, Jarrow, for many years, since the demise of the shipyard, it was labelled the town that was murdered, and everybody thought that was a depressed area. Now, if you're talking financially, maybe that was right, but as a kid, I never thought I was poor. You know, I always. You see these pictures of children supposedly without shoes and things like that. My father worked in a shipyard. He was a labourer in the shipyards, but I always had shoes and decent set of trousers and pullover to go to school. I would never have known I was poor until somebody maybe told me at a later date, you know. But I still didn't recognise myself. I didn't compare myself with anybody else. All my schoolmates all had decent shoes, all and things like that. Eh? But there's no doubt there was a lot of unemployment in the area. Jarrow was a lot more sort of old-fashioned than today. There was basically two large streets full of shops, a street called Ormond Street and a street called Grange Road. And on those two streets, which were, I don't know, 100 yards apart, all the business of the town went on. And they all, there wasn't many shops that were closed. We had a library, we had the mechanics hall, there was the co-op was a big trading organisation in Jarrow, and they had a co-op hall which where dances were run and things like this. The local Mechanics Institute, which had been built in the days of the Palmer shipyard, paid for basically by the Palmer brothers and the men by subscription. Local dances were run in there. In the early days it had been a library, and they had run evening classes in there in the early days.